Hi there, it's Thomas. Today I want to talk about the places that video games are set. Now, there are some games that wear their inspirations proudly on their sleeves. Grand Theft Auto is a love letter to LA, and New York City is unapologetic in its references to New York. But today I want to talk about something different. Games that reference real-life places that you likely never knew did so. Here are 6 of them. The first is Sonic Adventure. It all began in 1997 with this demo for the SEGA Saturn. You see, at the time it had been a number of years since the last Sonic game had been released, and the public were losing interest. Sonic was out of date. So, Team Sonic started work on a 3D Sonic game for the SEGA Saturn. Unfortunately, they soon ran into a brick wall. The Saturn wasn't really designed to support 3D games, and so this demo you're looking at is about as far as they got. It seemed as though their 3D Sonic game was dead in the water. But only a few months later, word reached Sonic Team that Sega had a new console in the works, the Dreamcast, and it was being designed from the ground up to support 3D. Sonic Team knew this was their last opportunity to show the world that Sonic was relevant and advanced even. So they decided to design a realistic-looking Sonic game with advanced graphics. There was only one problem. Half the game's story was set in the present day, which was easy enough to recreate. Just look outside the window, and there was a city to use as a reference. But the other half of the game took place inside ancient ruins. Not quite as easy to experience firsthand, right? Well, only a few days later, the entire Sonic team were on a plane to Central and South America. They were embarking on a trip across the world to visit some of the region's best-known ancient ruins. Chichen Itza, San Gervasio, the Nazca Lines, Tikal, Machu Picchu, and many more. And as they visited each ruin, the team carefully took close-up photographs of the walls, floors, and ceilings. They took tens, probably hundreds of pictures throughout their journey. And finally, with their trip complete, the team returned to Japan. Then, when they started modelling the game's ancient ruins, Sonic Team had a perfect source for the textures, the photographs they took on their trip. These photos were used to add authenticity to every wall, floor, and ceiling in the game. And it worked. Sonic Adventure was heralded as a graphical revolution. And it was as easy as spending thousands of dollars on an intercontinental plane journey. Simple. Number 2 is Super Mario Kart. In 1990, Shigeru Miyamoto gave his designers a challenge. Make me a 2-player version of F-Zero. Now, it soon turned out that this wasn't exactly possible with the technical limitations of the Super Nintendo, so the game morphed from a high-speed racing game to a slower-paced kart racer. But working out the physics of these karts proved itself to be a bit of a challenge for the team. Director Hideki Kono explained, "The word kart immediately calls to mind go-karts, but what we had in mind for the game were serious racing karts. And the only way they could truly get a feel for the physics of real racing karts was to try driving one firsthand." When the team suggested this to their producer, Shigeru Miyamoto, he replied, "Why, can't you tell what they're like without driving them?" But he eventually caved in, and the team set off to the nearby resort of Nemu no Sato, where a go-karting race course was located. The team spent the day driving around the course, getting a feel for the physics of these karts. But when they later tried adding these realistic physics into Mario Kart, they soon discovered that the game wasn't much fun with realistic physics at all. So, was this whole trip meaningless? A waste of time? Well, Shigeru Miyamoto seemed to think so, explaining, "We could have made this game without that bit of research." But I have to disagree with Miyamoto here, because while most of the team were driving around the course in their go-karts, one team member was off doing something else. Sound engineer Taro Bando, who was in charge of Mario Kart's sound effects, pulled out his microphone and actually recorded the sound of the go-karts firsthand. And after a bit of editing, this sound ended up making it into the final game. Here it is. I still get the feeling that Miyamoto disapproved, though. Number 3 is Ace Attorney. Let me introduce you to Shu Takumi. If you've never heard of him before, he's the man behind the Ace Attorney series. But in late 2000, Shu Takumi had a big problem on his hands. After years of waiting, he'd finally been given an opportunity by Capcom to develop the detective game he'd always wanted to create. But his game would have a twist. Instead of featuring a detective, his detective game would feature a lawyer. So, Capcom assigned Takumi a group of 7 developers to bring his game to life. Seemed good, right? But when Takumi told the new team about his plans to design a game around being a lawyer, he got some less than positive reactions in response. No one thought that a game about being a lawyer would be interesting. The legal system was boring. No one cared about it. But then, with almost comedic timing, Shu Takumi happened to glance out the window of the meeting room when he noticed the nearby Osaka District Court, of all things. And then and there, Takumi made a proposal. Let's all visit the courthouse to see what trials are really like. The team begrudgingly took Takumi up on his suggestion, and before long, they had arrived at the courthouse. It was absolutely huge, massive, with more than 20 individual courtrooms inside. The team started by watching some petty crimes, but they gradually worked their way up to some more gruesome ones. And by the end of the day, Takumi's team were all crimed out. But this visit to the courthouse had inspired them, just like Takumi. They were now much more convinced that a game about being a lawyer could be interesting, fascinating even. And so, when they got back to Capcom headquarters, they soon began putting together the beginnings of what would eventually become Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. And it was all thanks to their visit to Osaka District Court. But that's not quite where the story ends, because this Ace Attorney game turned out to be a bit of a success, and so Capcom approved not 1, but 2 sequels. And clearly, Shu Takumi had taken some lessons from the development of the first game. Let's start with the first sequel, called Justice for All. This game features a case set inside this old-timey circus called Berry Big Top. It's not one of the most popular cases in the series, but it does exist. And during its development, Shu Takumi managed to get Capcom to approve a trip for his entire team to visit a nearby circus in the local area. Certainly a step up from the district court, that's for sure. And a year later, while working on the third game, Trials and Tribulations, Shu Takumi came up with a case set in a snowy mountain retreat. And I think you can see where this is going. Days later, Takumi and his team were on a plane, flying out to a real-life mountain getaway. Shu Takumi certainly knew how to get a great free holiday, that's for sure. Number 4 is Star Fox. And this game actually takes quite a lot of inspiration from the real world. First off, the game started out as a collaboration between Nintendo, who wanted to make a 3D game but didn't have the technical knowledge, and the British company Argonaut, who knew how to make a 3D game but didn't have that Nintendo magic to get it feeling right. And so, Shigeru Miyamoto, the game's producer, would oversee the British developers and give them feedback on the game's design. A few months in, and the basic DNA of the game was taking the form of some kind of space shooter. But Miyamoto still felt like something was missing. One day, he was walking around the Kyoto area, where Nintendo's office was located, when he decided to take a visit to the world-famous Fushimi Inari Shrine, which features 1,000 of these red torii gates, as they're called. And walking through these gates gave Miyamoto an idea. What if there were gates or arches of some kind for the space shooter character to fly through? And this idea proved crucial in the development of what would eventually become Star Fox. It's even featured in this original piece of concept art, right down there in the corner. But there's actually one other way in which the real world inspired Star Fox, and it's very unexpected, I think. You see, that Fushimi Inari Shrine I mentioned, well, Inari is actually the Shinto god of foxes. And you might be able to see where this is going. You see, a lot of the clubs and businesses in the local area were named after this shrine, including a boys' baseball team called the Inari Foxes. The team was located 15 minutes away from Nintendo's headquarters at the time. And one day, while looking at a sign reading Inari Foxes, Shigeru Miyamoto had a brainwave. Why not feature foxes as the main character of that space game? Not only that, but this fox would eventually become the game's namesake, Star Fox. And all of this came about because of a boys' baseball team. Number 5 is Professor Layton. Now, this story is a little shorter, but I still think it's worth telling. I know not everyone knows what Professor Layton is. Essentially, you play as this man in a hat with this blue-clothed boy as your sidekick, and you explore a mysterious village. And this village is super important to the game. Without giving away any spoilers, it serves as not only the game's setting, but also as the crux of its shocking plot twist. So, the game's developers, Level 5, knew that getting the village right was absolutely crucial. And one day, the game's artists were searching for inspiration when they had a brainwave. Near the Level 5 offices in Japan, there was this old abandoned coal mine, and at the site of this mine was a huge derelict tower around 50 meters or 150 feet tall. It was huge and looming and imposing, and just what Level 5 were looking for. And so the company's artists quickly began to draw up some designs using this tower as the basis, and it wasn't long before a final version was chosen and added to the center of the curious village, all thanks to an old coal mine outside Level 5's headquarters. And finally, number 6 is Breath of the Wild. Now, sometime around 2010, Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma made an important decision. Zelda needed to change. And so, the next entry in the series would feature a big open world. But Nintendo had never designed an open world game ever before. This was totally unknown territory for the company and its designers. Now, one of the biggest challenges the team faced was deciding just where every location on the map should be laid out. How far apart should they be? How far should the player have to travel? To find the answers to these questions, the team looked right outside the window, to Nintendo's hometown of Kyoto. Now, Breath of the Wild is in no way a direct recreation of Kyoto, but this region played a pivotal role in how Hyrule came to be. Director Hidemaru Fujibayashi explains, "I took a map of Kyoto and overlaid it on the game world, and I tried to imagine going to places that I know in Kyoto." In other words, Breath of the Wild could only have been created by looking outside the window. But that's not quite where it ends, because while Nintendo have never confirmed these claims outright, there are tens, even hundreds of locations dotted across Breath of the Wild's map that bear resemblance to real-world places. Just a quick Google search will reveal thousands of posts online from people claiming to have found the real-world inspiration behind such and such place from Breath of the Wild. Now, I'm pretty dubious about a lot of these claims. Like, there's a big spiral jetty in Utah that admittedly bears very strong resemblance to Breath of the Wild's Wrist Peninsula. But I can't help but wonder how likely it is for Breath of the Wild's designers to be researching Utah sculptures from the 70s. Or there's an area in Breath of the Wild with these huge veiny trees that almost look like mushrooms. And some people suggest that these were based on the Socotra island of Yemen, where these similar trees can be found. But while the two tree varieties do look sort of similar, it's not close enough to draw any real conclusions in my mind. But there's one claim which, to me, holds a lot more water. If you've played your fair share of Breath of the Wild, you'll be familiar with the iconic dueling peaks. They're these two huge mountains right near the center of Hyrule that you'll keep coming back to time and time again. Well, let me introduce you to the Sado Kinzan gold mine, just off the coast of Niigata, Japan. If we travel above ground, you'll see this huge mountain here, which looks extremely similar to Zelda's dueling peaks. It actually started off as one big mountain, but it was dug away until it had this huge gash down the middle. Now, it's impossible to know whether this mountain really served as the inspiration for Breath of the Wild's dueling peaks. I do think it's very probable, though. Nintendo's designers used the real world as a basis for a lot of Breath of the Wild, and I don't know why this would be any different. Sado Gold Mine is fairly well known throughout Japan, after all, and the similarity here is just breathtaking. But the truth is, we'll never know for sure. However, I think it's a testament to the world of Breath of the Wild that this is even in question. This game's version of Hyrule is so realistic and believable that we can't help but compare it to our very own world. And I think that's a big accomplishment. Hi there, thanks for watching. You can subscribe for more videos like this. And if you want to help make this channel just a little more financially stable, you can donate to my Patreon with the link below, like these cool people on screen. Every pledge, no matter how small, helps keep these videos coming every week.